Balance is a very important thing in multiplayer games, as bad balance can allow certain strategies to dominate the game and make the game become stale faster than it otherwise would. Hence the constant balance patches you see in games today. However, single-player games are usually less concerned about this, since they don't have to worry about a second player getting mad that they're locked in a forever block string. Fire Emblem is an interesting case though, since it's a strategy game that actively seeks to challenge the player, and for 30 years, each game has tried to adjust strategies in an attempt to change how effective they are, to varied success. But before we get into these strategies, remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you end up enjoying the video. But then again, why would you watch the whole video when you could just use the warp staff? Jokes aside, the warp staff is a meme in the Fire Emblem community for a reason. It was first introduced in the first Fire Emblem and it let you warp an infinite distance, meaning you could instantly complete levels. So, how long did it take them to change this? While it's still infinite in 2 and 3, they did change its function in 4, but 4 is a very strange game that doesn't reflect the rest of the series, so I won't be talking about it much in this video until later. And clearly the change didn't stick, since it went right back to infinite range in Thracia. A permanent change wasn't made until Binding Blade, where the range depended on the user's magic stat instead of just being infinite, and this change stuck for all of the Game Boy Advance games. You could also only get one per run, meaning you had to be a bit conservative with it compared to Thracia, which couldn't help but give you one every 30 seconds. Don't get me wrong though, it's still a very good item in regular playthroughs and still very important in speedruns and draft races. It's just that you can't beat the whole game in 17 seconds anymore. So I'd say the item was in an acceptable state, but maybe still a bit too strong. So, what did Path of Radiance do with the item?
Change the world. My final message. Goodbye.
Welp, that's one way to solve that problem. After Path of Radiance, the staff would not appear at all in Fire Emblem games outside of remakes until the release of Three Houses. More on that game later, which is a 14-year gap. That is certainly one way to nerf a strategy, but I guess the devs actually wanted people to play the games they spend like 3 years each making. Who could have guessed? As for a weapon that IS tried to nerf, one of the biggest ones would have to be Nosferatu, a spell that drains the opponent's health and replenishes your own. Funnily enough, Nosferatu didn't actually start out all that great. It was first introduced in Gaiden as a 50-hit spell that had 0 might, so, not exactly breaking any ground here. It did get significantly better in Fire Emblem 3, and remained a pretty good spell in all of its subsequent appearances. Now, being able to absorb your opponent's HP is a very good effect, but this was balanced by the fact that you would usually only get about 1 or 2 per game with about 20 uses each. So, how did Awakening handle this spell?
What can I fix you with?
Well, you could buy an infinite amount of them, of course, allowing you to beat the whole game without needing to take any permanent damage. It did only absorb half of the damage dealt in this game, but that change didn't really matter all that much. It also paired excellently with the skill Vengeance, which you've probably seen activated in almost every round of combat in the footage I'm using. This isn't the only interesting decision made in Awakening, but it certainly is one of them. So, how did they adjust to Nosferatu in Fates? Well, you can still use it an infinite amount of times like every other weapon in Fates, but you can't double or trigger offensive skills like Vengeance anymore. So, how did this impact the viability of Nosferatu?
3, 2, 1, go!
It didn't. Even with all the changes, Nosferatu is still probably one of the best weapons in the game. But hey, at least they tried. Apparently they realized that all of this wasn't enough to stop Nosferatu, so in Three Houses they gave it only 1 might, and like all other spells in the game you can only use it a few times per map. And for other reasons that I'll elaborate on later, it's never really your best option. Now, changing individual items and weapons is one thing, but how about whole classes? Well, for the first 3 games, Cavaliers were pretty good since they had high movement and pretty good stats overall, but they weren't so much better than your infantry units that they became irrelevant, especially in 3 where they had to dismount indoors. However, this is the part of the video where I talk about Genealogy of the Holy War, the game that broke mounted units. You see, Genealogy introduced a mechanic called Canto, where after performing an action, including attacking, they could use the remainder of their movement. Their movement is also incredibly important, since maps in Genealogy are this big, and road tiles allow them to move further than they already could, meaning if you utilize all your options and play fast, our friend Ajamke here isn't going to get in on the action all that frequently. Now, unlike most of the quirks of genealogy, this one actually stuck and was carried over to Thracia. Surprisingly though, mounted units don't actually dominate this game, since there are a lot of indoor missions where, like in Fire Emblem 3, they have to dismount. Unlike Fire Emblem 3, however, this game has the traditional weapon rank system that we see today, meaning that if a Lance Cav is forced to dismount indoors, and their sword rank is lower than their lance rank, they have to use inferior weapons. This is especially detrimental to Finn, who can't even use his Brave Lance for the final 3 chapters of the game. So, Thracia encourages you to use a wide variety of units and classes depending on the chapter. On the other hand, the next game in the series, Binding Blade, does not. They ditched dismounting in this game, but they also got rid of being able to canto after using attacks. For some reason though, they felt the need to compensate paladins for this loss by giving them complete control over the weapon triangle in the game where the weapon triangle is most important. So you know, that's fun. They can still canto after every single action besides attacking in this game, by the way, including rescue, which is very important if you want to beat the game quickly. So yeah, considering Cavaliers have so many benefits, your boy Ugir never really gets time to shine. Tragic. They did reverse the decision to give them axes and sacred stones, but you can also solo the game on its hardest difficulty with the paladin you get in the prologue, so I'm not really sure if it was an effective change. So considering Cavaliers certainly were viable in the GBA games, what did they do in Path of Radiance to change them? Well, they can canto after attacking again, so you know, that's fun. There's also an item that only they have access to that boosts their growths. Can you guess who the best units in this game are? Now, to be fair, the next game in the Tellius series, Radiant Dawn, did actually have the first significant cavalry nerf. They put little ledges around a lot of maps that only infantry units can climb, meaning that usually cavs have to take the long way around. This is especially relevant on maps like Oliver's Mansion in that chapter where you have to save Skimir. There are also more swamp and desert maps than your typical Fire Emblem game, so cavs don't really dominate the whole game like they used to. They were nerfed further in Awakening since Canto was completely removed, and this change carried over to Fates. In Fates, they're a perfectly fine class with access to pretty good skills like Shelter, and their Hive movement is still a good boon, but in my experience playing a Lunatic, you don't really use them much more than your other units, except for Xander. But he's good because of his massive defense and his preferred weapon. Him starting in a mounted class is just a bonus. In Conquest, enemies are also much more likely to carry Beastbanes as well, so not even Xander gets off scot-free. Some players don't even keep their calves in their base classes. For example, the Ninja class is a decently popular choice for Sius, due to his ability to get soul beforehand. So it took them until 2015, but they finally managed to make a balanced class. Good job, IS, I'm proud of you. Now, we've seen at this point that if a particular element is too good, IS will usually tone it down eventually, even if it takes them, 20 years. However, when I was talking about calves, I purposefully didn't mention another type of mounted unit, the Flyer. Flyers are a lot like horse-mounted units since they both have superior movement and both got Canto at the same time. Flyers have one key difference though: they can completely ignore terrain. This effect has made them completely busted even before calves were broken in genealogy. Since in Mystery there are a lot of maps like this forest map here where your flyers can just skip the difficult terrain, kill all of the thieves, then go kill the boss before your other units are even a quarter of the way done with the map. And there are a lot of maps like this in Mystery. In genealogy they weren't too good because invisible walls prevented them from going everywhere, but they still got Canto. However, in Thracia they were completely unleashed since the rescue command was added in this game. Don't feel like playing this map? Just have Karen drop a boss killer off near the boss. Don't feel like playing this one either? Just drop Leaf off near the exit point. Is this ballista giving you a hard time? Well, worry not, my friend, you can just destroy it with your mighty movement device. They got the same nerf to Canto that calves did in Binding Blade, but it hardly matters. You can still use them to skip large portions of the map, which is especially good in a chapter like 21, where the reinforcements are triggered by stepping into specific zones. So with Flyers you can just completely bypass this. This remained true for the rest of the GBA games, and of course, they could Canto after attacking again in the Tellius series, meaning you can just do this. Here's the rest of the top tier from that tier list from earlier, by the way. In Radiant Dawn there's also a flyer named Har who can pretty much just solo every chapter he's available in. Then in Awakening the Dark Flyer class got a skill that lets you make multiple actions in one turn. And in Conquest, having a ton of flyers is nearly a necessity considering how much they trivialize otherwise hard maps. Fuga's Wild Ride is an infamous map that most people hate due to the wind mechanics. Well, just slap a few flyers on your team, fly over the gap, and boom, you're good to go. Then the map right after that is an escape map, where you can just deploy 2 to 4 units to just fly past everything. Then, 2 chapters after that, there's a canyon your flyers can go past to carry your units past the trickiest part of the map, and in Hanoka's map, there's a dragon vein that dramatically increases their movement. They also have some of the best combat in the game, since the Malignite class line has access to a skill that just flat out increases their strength, and 2 skills that deal true damage. What was the name of this game again? Alright, now let's get to the bottom of this real quick. Let's see here, what is this? Yep, that seems about right. Alright, so I think you get the point by now. Flyers have been absolutely broken since God's favorite year, 1994, and pretty much have received no significant nerfs that Cavs didn't also receive. However, if I'm remembering correctly, they may have a weakness. Allow me to search through my sacred texts for just a moment to see if they have any sort of weakness at all. Aha, they're weak to the bow and arrow type weapon. Alright, now let's go observe a real battle simulation so we can see how well the Flyer class line stacks up against their natural enemy, the Archer.
Success!
So yeah, the only weakness of the Flyer class isn't exactly difficult to avoid. The only real consistent downside to the class is their general availability. You usually only get 3 to 5 per game, and you usually only get 1 in the early game. For example, in Shadow Dragon you get Seda in Chapter 1, but you don't get Minerva, your second Flyer, until Chapter 10. And there's also a limit on how many units you can reclass into the Flyer class line, so it's not like you can ever just have a full army of them. Of course, this limit was removed in 3 houses, more on that game later, so even though the amount of Flyers you have is usually more limited than the amount of Cavs you have, I'm surprised IS never tried to take them down a peg considering they made several attempts to nerf the Cavalier class line. Perhaps Kaga should try to find a different passion. So we've talked about some nerfed strategies, and one that despite being so obscenely powerful has not been adjusted over the years. So, has IS ever buffed a particularly weak mechanic? Well, let's see. Oh, I know. In Fire Emblem 1, Barst can't promote? Okay, right, but in the remake, he can. Oh yeah, I guess there was also that time that they made bows the best weapon type. Okay, so as previously shown, bows weren't exactly, all that. However, in Gaiden for the NES, bows had 1 to 5 range, which is quite a far cry from only 2. This, of course, was also in the remake, Shadows of Valentia, but that change actually stuck for the next game, 3 Houses. More on that game right now! Out of all the Fire Emblem games, 3 Houses is, certainly one of them. Oh shit, my wall! In a way, 3 Houses is very special, because it has nearly every broken mechanic in the series. Warp, you have infinite uses of it since it's a spell individual characters learn, rather than a limited item, meaning you can just skip most maps in the game. Nosferatu, who needs HP when you can just have the Wrath and Vantage skill combo, a combo that very explicitly did not work in previous games. Mounted units have Incanto, you bet they do, even after attacking. Also, mounted units can use every physical weapon, meaning they have access to those bows that can counterattack at any range. And you can bet your ass they didn't nerf flyers in this game either. In fact, you can turn every unit in your army into a flyer if you really want to. All of these broken elements, including the new ones from 3 Houses like Stride, combine to make 3 Houses a comically easy game, even on the higher difficulties. So, those were Fire Emblem's attempts at balance, or in the case of 3 Houses, lack thereof. Even in games where attempts at balance were made, like Fates, it didn't exactly, work out for them, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, since executing powerful strategies can be fun, as long as they don't go overboard like they did in 3 Houses. With all that being said, I hope you enjoyed this retrospective on the balance of Fire Emblem games, and remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and maybe leave a comment about a powerful mechanic that you think I missed. But most importantly, remember to have a nice day. Bye-bye.